What's the difference between ETL and ELT? They both have extract, transform, load, but they're arranged differently. In the past, when ETL was created, cloud storage was very expensive. In order to minimize cost, businesses would transform the data first and load them in a data warehouse. Fast forward to today, with the advent of all these new exciting technologies like Snowflake, storage is much cheaper, which is why ELT was created. It makes more sense to dump your data in a data warehouse and slice and dice them later on. There are so many tools in the market for creating ELT pipelines. For example, we have dbt, Snowflake, Prefect, Daxter, Spark. How do I pick the right one? This is going to be a live coding tutorial where I'll walk you through how to build an ELT pipeline from scratch. I'll show you every step of the way and we'll talk about the thought process. We'll cover basic data modeling techniques such as how to build fact tables, data marts. We'll look into Snowflake RBAC and how to deploy our model on Airflow. For our tools, we will be using dbt for transformation, Snowflake for data warehousing, and Airflow for orchestration. For orchestration, feel free to use something else you're more comfortable with. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We'll use this Snowflake TPCH dataset, which is a free dataset provided by Snowflake. Make sure to have your Snowflake personal account ready, and let's dive right in. For this hands-on tutorial, we're going to be developing locally using dbt core. So the first thing to do is to go to dbt core, which is this website over here, and make sure you install dbt core using pip. So you can run pip install dbt core on your terminal. You can create a virtual environment if you want to. There are several other ways to install dbt core. You can install it on Homebrew. Make sure you have your Snowflake account set up. So I have my account right here. Let's see. And then pip install dbt core. The first thing we're going to do is to set up our environments in Snowflake. So we're going to create a warehouse, a database, and a role in Snowflake. And in that database, we're going to create a schema, and that's where we're going to write our dbt tables into. For the role, we're going to make sure this role is assigned to our user in Snowflake. And we're also going to grant access for your warehouse and your databases to that role. So let's do that. So let's use role account admin. Account admin is sort of the super user for Snowflake, by the way. And I'm going to create a warehouse. I'm going to call it dbt warehouse with warehouse size equals small, x small. Okay, and I'm going to create a database. Let's call it dbt database. And create a role. Let's call it dbt role. So let's run that. So press Command Enter to run your commands in your Snowflake worksheet. Okay, let's check the grants in your dbt warehouse first before we actually grant the warehouse usage onto the role. So let's show grants on warehouse, dbt warehouse. And you can see that there's only one user that has ownership privilege, which is the account admin. So what we're going to do next is to grant usage on warehouse dbt to role dbt role. And if we run this show grants on warehouse command again, we can see that there's another user that has usage privilege on this warehouse, and the grantee name is dbt role. So that looks good. And the second thing we're going to do is to grant role. We're going to grant this role to our user. So I'm using my own user. This could be, make sure to replace this with your own user. So what we're going to do next is to grant all on database dbt db to role dbt role. So we're going to make sure this role has access to this database that we've created. So let's run that again. Okay. Now that we've created our warehouses, databases, and roles, let's switch into the role we just created. So let's use dbt underscore role. And now we are going to create a schema, dbt db.dbt schema, like this. And if we look here in our databases objects, let's refresh the page. We can see dbt schema exists, but no objects are found. So everything looks good. If you have trouble rerunning this again, you can also do something like create database if not exist. Otherwise, if you try to create a role again, it's going to say the role already exists. So create role if not exist. You can do that too. If you want to drop your warehouses later, just so you don't incur cost, you can do something like use role account admin, use account admin again, and you can drop your warehouse if exists. dbt warehouse, drop database if exists, dbt db, drop role if exists, dbt role. So now we're going to initialize our dbt project, and all you have to do is run dbt init. I'm going to call my project data underscore pipeline. For the database, I'm going to set up my profile as Snowflake. For your account, make sure you go to Snowflake, and then go to your locator tab here, hover over. So I'm going to copy that, paste it here. For user, type in the user you created for Snowflake, and I'm going to put password for simplicity. So let's type in my password. For role, we're going to add in the role that we just created. So it's dbt underscore role. For warehouse, it's dbt underscore warehouse. So it's warehouse like this. For database, it's dbt underscore db. Schema is dbt underscore schema. For threads, I'm going to use 10 threads. Now cd into data pipeline. All right, and let's open VS Code. So let's configure our dbt underscore project YAML file. And this file basically tells dbt that this is a project folder, right? This is the main file that's going to reference. And it contains a bunch of useful information, like where to find your models, where you're putting your test, where your seeds, where your macros, so forth. I'm going to create two tables, one called staging, and this staging is going to be materialized as a view. And I'm going to set the Snowflake warehouse as dbt warehouse. And I'm going to create another table called marts, and this is going to be materialized as a table. And I'm also going to use the same Snowflake warehouse, which is dbt underscore warehouse. Let's delete the example models and create new folders. First one, let's call it staging, and let's call the next one marts. Let's install some third-party libraries. This is going to be useful later when we're creating surrogate keys for our models. So let's create a new folder. Let's call it packages.yaml. And in packages.yaml, I'm going to add dbt labs, dbt underscore utils. So this is a really common library in dbt. Let's look up what versions they have on dbt utils. Let's use the latest version actually. To install your packages, hit dbt deps. To kind of give you a high-level tour of dbt projects, so this dbt project YAML file tells dbt where to look for your models. So the models folder is where we're going to write our SQL logic. Our source datasets are going to live here, our staging files. It's really good practice to separate your staging files. So staging files are one-to-one with your source files, and you should separate them with marts folder. All these models are going to materialize in Snowflake. And this bottom piece of code here, where we tell dbt, hey, I want to materialize all my models in this staging folder as views, and I want to materialize all my models in this marts folders as tables. The macros folder, you can write reusable macros here, and I'm going to show you how to do that later. For dbt packages, by running dbt deps, this is where third-party libraries are going to live here. Seeds is for static files, so files that the data is not going to change very often. Maybe you have a data set, you have a CSV file that you need to reference, and you know it doesn't change for every few months, and you can put it in your seeds folder here. Snapshots are useful when you are trying to create incremental models. In test folder here, dbt test types. There's two types of tests in dbt, and the first one is singular tests. And generic tests are parameterized queries that accepts arguments. For example, check if this model doesn't have null values, or check if this model has values greater than 0. So that's kind of a high-level tour of dbt projects. Now, what we're going to do next is to set up our source and staging tables. So go to models, go to models, and let's create a tpch underscore sources.yaml. The name of this file doesn't really matter. So I'm going to create sources. So the first source, I'm going to get it from the tpch dataset. I'm going to name it tpch, and it's coming from Snowflake sample data. And that basically comes from right here, Snowflake sample data. And you have these bunch of schemas here. I'm going to reference them. So go back to schema, tpch, sf1. For tables, pull in the orders table. And this orders table has a bunch of columns, but I'm going to write some tests here. So there's a order key here, and I want to make sure this key is unique and it's not null. So like what I said about generic tests. So the second table I want to pull in is line item table. And this line item table has a bunch of columns. That's order key. L order key is a foreign key to this table. So let's test this relationship. There's a generic test called relationships, and to source, tpch orders. And the field is order key. So this test is going to make sure that this value here is actually a foreign key of this table. So now that we have our sources table, let's create our staging models. Staging models, let's call it staging underscore tpch orders.sql. So let's try to pull in data from our sources first to make sure everything works. So the way you pull data from source is using this source function wrapped around this Jinja curly braces bracket. And let's pick up data from orders. Let's do dbt run. Ooh, it's not working. Let's see what's the problem here. Oh, okay. So the issue is the YAML files have to be indented correctly. So it wasn't indented as a typo. It should be name, not names. And there should be a indentation here, relations. Let's try to run that again. Everything looks good. Staging folder.
Let's hit dbt run to run all your models. Okay, see, it says that it passed, and if we go back here to our worksheet and refresh, we can see our first table, staging TPCH orders, created right here. So that's pretty cool. So what we want to do in our staging folder is I want to rename some of these values. So let's do O order key as order key, and then O cust key as customer key, O order status as status code, O total price as total price, O order date as order date. So I'm just going to rename my variables here and do the same thing for, let's create staging tpch line items.sql. So let's do the same thing. Let's get our source and then the name of the table, line item. So this time I'm going to copy paste a bunch of the columns here, and I'm going to create a surrogate key using dbt utils. And a surrogate key it's useful in dimensional modeling when you have a bunch of fact tables and dimensional tables that you want to connect. So let's create our surrogate key here, dbt utils surrogate key. Let's do something like this. So I'm going to use L order key. I'm going to use both the line number and the order key to create my surrogate key. Let's name this as order item key. Think of it as a hash. To run this model only, press dbt run -- select, or -s for short, staging tpch line items. Let's go. Okay, it says that compilation error warning, this function has been replaced by a new name. So let's rename that. Run again. Okay, it works. Perfect. The next step we're going to do is we're going to transform our models. When you work for a company, you have to do some kind of business transformation on these staging tables. Staging tables are one-to-one with source table. And we're going to aggregate some data in this line items table here and create a fact table as a result. So what is a fact table? So a fact table is a dimensional modeling technique that stores results from a business process. So data warehouse toolkit. So let's look at what a fact table is. So a fact table contains numeric measures produced by an operational measurement in the real world. So you can think of a grain in a fact table as a table that represents a bunch of numeric events and is connected to other tables that you call dimensional tables. So a fact table always contains foreign keys for each of its associated dimensions. So that's why we created our surrogate key. So let's go back here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reference the files I created just now. So let's use the ref function, staging tpch orders, and let's call it orders. Whoops. And I'm going to join this table with staging tpch line items as line item, and we're going to join it on this key. So orders.order key equals line item dot order key. I'm going to copy a bunch of columns here, and we're going to order this by orders.order date. Let's see if this works. dbt run. So remove this comma here, syntax error. Orders, order key. Make sure you run your orders table again. Whoops. And then make sure you run your int order items table again. Okay, everything works. So what I'm going to do next is to create a macro function. And macro functions are a good way to reuse business logic across multiple models. So let's create a file called pricing.sql. Let's create pricing.sql. I'm going to Google dbt macros. Go here. Let's copy this example. Let's copy, put it here. I'm going to rename this as discounted amount. It's going to have two inputs. The first is extended price and discounted price, discount percentage. So over here is where we typically write our business logic, write some business logic like this, and let's reuse this macro in this marts folder. So I'm going to call this function discounted amount on line item extended price and line item discount percentage. So I'm trying to get the item discount amount right here. Let's see if this works. dbt run int order items. Okay, it works. Good. By the way, I'm going to add a new column here. Let's add extended price. Let's create more intermediate files. I'm going to do this really quickly. Int order items summary.sql. It's going to do a simple group by, taking the intermediate files we created and just do a group by over the extended price and discount amount. And finally, let's create a fact model. So fct orders.sql. And in this fact model here, let's select star from ref staging tpch orders as orders. And we're going to join it with ref int order items summary as order item summary on, let's join it with the order key. Order by the order date. I'm going to take everything from the orders table, so a star, and I'm going to combine this order item summary. So dbt run. Let's see if this works. Everything works. So we have our fact table. Let's go back to Snowflake and click refresh. If we click on tables, we can see fact orders. And this fact orders table is connected to our orders key right here. So the way it works is this orders item is our dimensional model. This is a huge oversimplification, and there's a lot more to it to fact tables and dimensional tables, but we're not going to talk about it in this video. All right. Now let's create some test code. There are two types of tests in dbt: a singular test, where you write SQL queries that returns failing rows, and a generic test. So let's write some generic test. So in the models folder here, I'm going to create generic tests. You can name this file whatever you want. I'm going to call it generic test, let's say. write some generic tests. So this is what I mean by that. There's a bunch of inbuilt generic tests, like unique, not null, relationships. So let's test the relationship of the foreign keys right here. Staging, TPCH, orders, field, and severity. Let's put warning. Let's add another test for status code. And let's put accepted values. So I'm saying that for this column status code, I only want to accept P, O, and F. And for this relationships generic test, I want to test the foreign keys. So make sure to indent these values here correctly. Accepted values, values P, O, and F. So this piece of code here is telling DBT to say, check for these values. These are the only acceptable values. For relationships here, it's checking the foreign keys, and you're checking order key must be unique and it must not be null. Hit DBT test. Nice, works. Completed successfully. Let's build some singular tests. Let's create fact orders discount.sql. Now let's write a test to check if the item discount is always greater than 0. Because you can't have a negative discount. If you have a negative discount, that means you're paying more money, right? Fact orders. Let's do where item discount amount is greater than 0. So DBT test. So what happens if you do less than 0? It's going to fail. So it fails because this query is returning a non-null value. And you can see here the failure. There are 1 million? 1.4 million values that didn't meet this test. So it should be greater than 0. Okay, now it's passed. I'm going to write one more singular test. Let's call it fact orders date valid.sql. And over here, let's do select star from ref fact orders, where let's check if the date of the order date, I'm going to cast this value as a date, is greater than the current date, or the date is older than 1990, which is a long time ago. So what this test is saying is make sure the values are within an acceptable range. So let's do DBT test. Everything is working again. So now that we have our singular test set up, we have a bunch of generic tests. To summarize everything we've built so far, we've created our source tables here. We have a bunch of staging tables that reference the source tables. For this line item staging table, we generated a surrogate key so it can reference later. In our downstream fact tables, we have a bunch of marts tables here, and they do a bunch of transformations. These transformations use macros that we wrote right here. And finally, we have an fact table that references some dimensional models. So we've done a lot so far. Now let's actually deploy this using Airflow. So I'm going to use Airflow to deploy this DBT DAG, but you can choose your own orchestration platform of choice, whether it's Prefect, Dagster. You can even try to run this on AWS if you prefer to. Prefect and Dagster are great alternatives that build upon Airflow, but let's just stick with Airflow And I'm going to use this library called Astronomer Cosmos. And this library here is going to allow us to run our DBT core projects using Airflow DAGs and task groups. It's really simple to install. All I have to do is go to your terminal here and run brew install Astro. I already have it installed, so this is probably not going to work for me. Or it's going to update my Astro. Okay. So we're going to initialize a new project using Airflow. So let's make directory, let's call it dbt dag, cd into dbt dag, and run astro dev init. So it's going to initialize a new Astro project. Let's take a look at the code. Go to your Docker file and add this to your Docker file at the bottom. So this command is going to install dbt Snowflake. After you add this piece of code to your Docker file, okay, after you add this to your Docker file, we're not done yet. We need to add to our requirements file. Let's add Astronomer Cosmos and add Apache Airflow providers Snowflake. So make sure to add these two lines for your requirements txt file, astro dev start. Okay, Airflow starting out. Amazing. Amazing, amazing. So let's go to localhost 8080. Username is admin. Password is admin. Okay. So in order to run dbt on Airflow, copy paste data pipeline dbt folder into DAX folder right here. So I've just did it. It's DAX dbt data pipeline. And here's the piece of code to write your dbt DAG. So I'm basically just importing a bunch of libraries right here for datetime OS using the Cosmos library. I am setting my connection to Snowflake using Snowflake Con. For my profile arguments, I make sure I set it up to the database we created in Snowflake and the schema we created in Snowflake. For your dbt DAG right here, make sure to point it towards the right directory, and let's call it dbt DAG ID. And I'm going to schedule it for a daily run. So everything here looks quite good. If I go back to my Airflow right here, I can go to dbt_DAG. There's one more thing we have to do left. So go to admin, go to connections, and then click add a connection. Let's call it Snowflake Con. And let's go to find Snowflake. So put in your Snowflake account. I'm going to put in mine. Your warehouse, dbt warehouse, dbt warehouse, dbt db. Role is dbt role. And that's it. Just double checking everything looks good. Okay, everything looks good. Hit save. Let's go back to our DAX, go to dbt DAG, and let's try to run this. So before we run it, we can see this is how Cosmos will actually create a graph using graph for us to show us how this fact orders table is constructed. We see the two staging models that we created. Goes to this intermediate table, goes to another intermediate table, and this table goes to fact orders. You can even see your test code right here. The trigger die. Let's see if this works. It failed. Let's take a look at why it failed. Go to log. Failed to execute. Oh, okay, I know. So go back to admin connections. I need to type in my Snowflake username and password. So I'm going to type my password and user right here. I'm going to blur this out and then click save. Let's try run again. Okay, looks like it's working. You can see the user interface. Okay, perfect. It ran successfully. If we go to run and go to logs, we can see dbt code here actually running. You can see our DAC code. XCOM is pretty difficult to use in my opinion. There's a limit to how much data you can pass on XCOM. Okay, awesome. If you made it this far to the tutorial, I hope you learned a lot. We've made a lot of progress in this tutorial. Let's wrap up. Thank you for watching. I genuinely hope that you got a lot of value out of these hands-on tutorials. And to summarize what we learned today, we learned how to set up our Snowflake environments with our warehouses, our roles, our users, tables, schemas, databases. We learned how to connect dbt core with Snowflake. And inside dbt, we've built models in our staging folders and our marts folders in order to organize our models better. After building the models, we learned how to use macros to templatize code and reuse business logic. We know the difference between generic tests and singular tests using dbt. And finally, we orchestrated this dbt code inside Airflow. Let me know in the comments what kind of videos you want to see next. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.